channel, Edible Thoughts Makes. My name is Stephanie, and this is another episode of Maker Musings. Maker Musings is a new addition to this channel, if you will, on topics that are related to making and things that I may have talked about a little bit in previous episodes, but I wanted a separate section to really maybe delve a little deeper into the topics, or to just have a place where I can reference things that are frequently asked. I think I need to adjust the camera a little bit. I think I have part of my head out of frame here. 1 second. I think that's better. So this is a casual type of format. I will not be going through different projects or anything like that. Basically, I will be sitting here and chatting with you on a topic that's on my mind, and I will be knitting away as we talk. The purpose of these is to be very casual, minimal editing on my end, and preferably 30 minutes or less. Today, I am working on the body of a sweater as we chat. I've got water in my water bottle here. Got a lot of bright colors going on this very cloudy day here in March, year 2023. The topic I would like to talk about today is on testing. So testing patterns for designers. It can be testing like knitting patterns, crocheting patterns. I've done both. In the last several years, I have tested nearly 70 patterns for independent designers, and I have some thoughts about it. This is never meant to be a do or don't, or this is how you should do things. This is how, I don't know, things like that. It is meant to be a space for me to share my thoughts on particular topics, and for you to think about how that affects you or not, or how that influences maybe your decision making on, for example, for testing, whether or not it's something that you think you might be interested in doing or not, or just things to consider. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get at. Things to consider if you are thinking about testing patterns for an independent designer, or maybe you've done it already and maybe you agree with some of these things. Maybe you don't. Again, they're my thoughts, and I am taking the time to share them with you. So yeah, let me open my notebook so I make sure I don't skip anything that I wanted to talk about. All right, we are going to talk about the who, what, where, when, why, how of testing patterns. I'm mostly going to say test knitting if I do say test knitting, but it applies to crocheting and stuff like that too. I don't know so much about sewing. I have not done any testing of sewing patterns, so I cannot speak to that at all. I have tested for several different designers. Of course, there's always more, and I'm just sharing a little bit about my experience and things that might play into different factors that might play into whether or not you decide to do it, or how you decide to do it, or whatever. So we are going to start with who. I am not going to tell you who to test for, who not to test for, anything like that. I am encouraging you to dig around. Do your own research. Figure out, what this designer's style is, and does it match yours? Is it what you actually want to make? Have you knit a pattern by them before? Designers have different formatting that they use for their patterns, and some work better for, some people than others. So I feel like if you're going to test a pattern for somebody, it might be a good idea just to see if their patterns are something that you like before you decide to apply to test for them. Also, you decide how this affects you or not, but do their values align with yours? Do you want to be associated with them? If you are going to be testing for this particular designer, generally designers also use their testers as part of their marketing for a new pattern, and I'll talk more about that later as well. But your name will end up being associated with them. So is that something you're comfortable with or not? Are they a size inclusive designer? Check out their other patterns. See if their garments have a size range that you think is something that you are willing to support. So those are things to think about. Again, I'm not telling you who to test for, who not to test for. I'm just telling you things that I look at when I am deciding whether or not to apply to test for a particular pattern. All right, let's go on to what. Designers will put out test calls for testing patterns, and I suppose maybe I should have started with the what before I started with the who. But what testing is basically a designer will have a pattern. Generally, they will have had it tech edited, which is another thing to look for, and that a tech editor can help with like formatting their pattern, making sure things like make sense, and just overall make a pattern written out in a way that's not just like their first draft. There's usually multiple drafts by the time it goes to testing, but that might not be the case, and I would watch out for that, because as a tester, you are volunteering. Generally, people are not paid, and I'm not saying here like advocating for paying or not paying or whatever the case may be. I'm just saying in general, when you're testing a pattern, it is all by volunteer, and just be careful that you don't end up doing any work that a tech editor is actually paid to do. I just think that's something to be aware of, because tech editors are paid to do their job. That was kind of a side note into the what. Well, no, that applies to the what. Check out the level of difficulty. Is it over your head? Is it not over your head? A lot of times designers like to have beginners to whatever pattern it is, so that they can see it from fresh eyes, whether or not something makes sense, or whether or not something important is left out in the instructions that could be useful. I also appreciate it when a designer is upfront about their expectations. I want to know what's expected of me as a tester. Am I required to have finished photos? Am I required to share works in progress photos on social media? Is it a secret? Am I not supposed to share anything? Am I required to use the yarn that is specified in their sample? Can I use whatever I want? Can I use what's on hand? Things like that I feel like are really important to know up front, just for clear communication. And in general, I would say communication is key. If life things come up, don't just ghost the designer. Tell them what's going on. You don't have to tell them specifically what's going on in your life. There can just be life emergencies, and you might not make the deadline, or something comes up, but have that open communication. So I mentioned that it's volunteer. Sometimes designers will have discounts for certain yarns, especially if they're collaborating with a certain yarn company or yarn dyer, and so you might get a percentage off for that. And then generally you end up with a finished PDF of the final pattern. And then oftentimes designers will also give you a coupon code for a complimentary pattern that they have published, or some of them give a end date to use, so that if they have future releases coming up, you might be able to use it on a future release in the coming months. I will say a pet peeve of mine is when a designer says, oh, and you get a free pattern. It is not really free, okay? You have donated your time, your efforts, you are using your own materials, you are spending money to test for them. So for them to quote unquote give you a free pattern, you're not really like winning out here. So I would really, that's just a pet peeve of mine. Don't call it a free pattern. Complimentary pattern, pattern of thank you, reads very differently to me than saying like, I got a free pattern, because you're doing free work for that designer. So just keep that in mind. Okay, let's go on to where. So the where I think is important because I want to know if this designer's patterns are published only on Ravelry or also on a different site. Now, not every person is able to create a whole nother website or have like an Etsy shop to also have their patterns on, or anywhere else. So it's not necessarily like a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not necessarily a, I can't think of the phrase. Whatever the phrase is where, oh, I can't think of the phrase. Well, anyway, some designers just have the ability to also host their patterns not on Ravelry and others don't. I think some do it on Lovecrafts, some do it on Etsy, some do it on their own websites, but just to be aware of that, and if they have like a backup plan for, not backup plan, an alternative plan for people who might want to purchase their patterns but cannot access Ravelry. Also to note is how is their test being hosted. So are you submitting all your comments and questions through email? Are you doing it through an app like Slack? Are you doing it through a Ravelry thread? I feel like that's stuff that you should know up front and would be part of the designer's expectations. Like, how are you expected to participate in this test? Is it run like a mini knit-along? Or are you kind of like on your own, doing your own thing and just submitting feedback as you go? And, you know, what's your preference? Is that going to be something that's going to hinder you or something that is going to encourage you? Yeah, that's something to think about. Okay, the next, we did who, what, where, when. Something also that I expect to be upfront is the designer's timeline. Some designers have very short timelines and they are sometimes in their control and sometimes not, because it depends if they're working with like another publishing company and that there's a deadline there. Sometimes things get pushed back for family situations or just for whatever the publication deadline is. So things might change a little bit there. And know yourself. So know if you can make that deadline or not. Just be realistic. I mean, things come up, but just know yourself. If you'll be able to actually dedicate the time to it. That being said, I am also looking at whether or not I think that timeline is reasonable for someone knitting a larger size, for example, because yes, that's going to take more time. Some designers will say, like for certain sizes, just knit like the yoke and one sleeve or something like that, so that you can get an idea for the fit of the yoke and the fit of the sleeve. And a lot of times they want to know how much yardage you're using to get an idea if their estimates are close to what your actual use is. And so if you just knit one sleeve, like you could double that, right? And then as far as body length goes, I feel like that's important for part of fit too, and some designers want like the yoke and the body done in one sleeve. But anyway, it just depends on the designer. Things are different for everybody. I think there needs to be enough time to get materials. Not everybody has yarn on hand to knit a sweater, and I think that sometimes deadlines are so short, and if you need to pick yarn, buy yarn, and get the yarn shipped to you, that may take like 2 weeks. And if the deadline is only like a month or even 6 weeks, that's not a ton of time to knit a sweater, and not everybody should be expected to just drop everything and knit on that designer's sweater solely and like not sleep for a month. I just feel like that is very false expectations for anybody living life. Like, just don't do that. And again, with the open communication, I feel like life happens, okay? Things happen. And I can't remember when or where I saw this, but somebody was saying like some designers were charging testers for their patterns, or like a fee or something if they didn't finish on time. And honestly, that's like a red flag for me. Like, I get it, designers have been burned with testers ghosting on them once they get the pattern, but I feel like that is the minority of people doing that. I feel like, I can't say, I'm not a designer, I've never, put out a test call for anything, and I don't plan on it. But I feel like the majority of people are, respectful and don't just do that, right? And if you really can't finish, sometimes there are life things that just come up. And I think you just need to be open in communication with the designer. You don't have to tell them what's happening, but if you're not going to be able to finish, like, just don't ghost the designer. But yeah, and then on the flip side of that coin, just be wary if a designer is going to charge you if you don't make a deadline. Like, again, life happens, and especially if it was like a short deadline to begin with, I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of unreasonable. That's my opinion. Don't come after me about it. I'm just telling you my thoughts. Next is why. This is where I feel like you have to check yourself. Do you really want or can do it? I feel like there's so many bright and shiny things out there constantly, and with just social media in general, there's a bombardment of information, and everybody is trying to put out that next new it thing. And here's a reminder that says you don't have to make that brand new shiny thing. If you want to, go for it. The why is just to check yourself. Like, do you have the time to do it? Do you actually really want to do it? Like, do you just want to do it right now? Or tomorrow, are you still going to be thinking about it? And the next day, you're still going to be thinking about it. Do you just want to wait till the pattern comes out and purchase it then? Yeah, so the why, check yourself. Also in the why is maybe why you might want to try testing. Maybe you want to kind of get a glimpse of the behind the scenes. Again, some designers will be more or less open to sharing the behind the scenes stuff. So just because you're testing does not open the doors for you into like an entire design world. Every designer runs their testing process a little differently. Okay, the last is how. Do you have the tools you need to do this test? Some designers have a set-aside fund to help people with yarn support or with the tools or things like that. I would say the majority of designers do not. So you are responsible for having the tools that you need to make that test happen. Now, do you have the budget? Do you need to purchase new yarn? Do you have the yarn available to test that pattern? These are questions I ask myself ahead of time before I apply for any test, because I want to know if I need to, or not if, I need to know how much of an investment I'm putting into it and if that's going to be worth it for me and for the designer, because I'm making a commitment to them and they are relying on me to provide certain information, right? So am I going to be able to hold up my end of the bargain if I apply for this test? So these are things that I think about. There was another thing I wanted to mention, and now I don't remember. Probably because I didn't write it down. Well, I don't remember what it is. So yes, those are the who, what, where, when, why. How, thoughts that I have on testing patterns for independent designers. Have you tested for any designers before, and what are your thoughts on your process? Everybody has different experiences, and honestly I think a lot of it is just kind of knowing what to expect, and that goes for the designer and for yourself. Like, what do you expect to come out of the process? Oh, I remember the other thing I wanted to mention. So marketing, yes. I said earlier on that I was going to come back around to that part. Now, if you're testing a pattern, I feel like the expectations should not include marketing. Because if you're testing it, you're really just testing the readability, you're testing the clarity, you're testing, like, fit too, right? And whether you share finished photos of yourself or whoever you're making it for wearing it, that, yes, can help people decide if something might be suitable for them, how the fit is, how it looks on a body. I absolutely agree with that, but that's also then part of the marketing that you're doing, again, for free for the designer. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that that expectation needs to be upfront. And I appreciate designers who leave that open. Like, it's not a requirement for you to have to provide finished, worn photos of the item. These days, most people have a smartphone that has a camera photo taking capability, so I feel like that isn't so much of an issue as far as being able to provide photos. I just think that expectation needs to be upfront, and I personally think it should be optional. Not everybody is comfortable with getting in front of a camera. Not everybody is comfortable with photos on social media, and that shouldn't hinder their ability to test a pattern. There are ways that you can, take photos and share on social media without showing your face. You can put a sticker over it, you can get creative, you can be reading a book. There's tons of ways to take photos without showing your face. So if that's the issue, like, there's lots of ways to get around that. But at the same time, I mean, you're still going to be in front of a camera. Your photo is still going to be out there on social media, and I just don't feel like that requirement should be part of testing. I feel like that should be optional. Again, my personal opinion, just sharing those thoughts. Maker Musings. This is where I share those thoughts. But yeah, so that, I think, is it for my thoughts on testing patterns. I hope you found it interesting, and I will talk to you next time. Take care.